episode 247 of the CRICKETher Weekly. We are recording this after session 1 of day 1 of the test match in the lunch break. So we need to get a bit of a jolly on, Sid. Current score, England having won the toss 103 for 1. And Maya Boucher, of course, has just before lunch brought up a 50 on test debut, so it's been a good morning for her and a pretty good morning for England, hasn't it?
Yeah, they've got through it all. I think that they haven't bowled a lot of overs, have they? So that's one key aspect here.
Yeah, so South Africa have bowled 27 overs in a session. Now, in a women's test, obviously, you're meant to have 100 overs bowled in a day. So that should mean that you bowl 33 overs in a session, roughly speaking. So they're about 6 overs short of that. And they haven't even got DRS to blame for it, Sid. Because as we have, as was announced yesterday, there is no DRS. Tammy Beaumont given an early let-off, second ball of the test, and that will be an area of much debate, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you were asking for what the South African authorities, well, who have been pretty upfront to be fair, but if you were asking for what they didn't want, it would be an interesting LBW decision going against them on the second ball of the test match, which everyone is going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And obviously, because the decision went against South Africa in this case. I mean, ultimately, Tammy Beaumont didn't go on. She was out. She was the only wicket to fall in that session. But if she had gone on and scored 200, then they'd have looked quite silly. But to be fair to the South African authorities, they've been pretty upfront with why this is. They've gone, no, we just don't have the money for this. We know that Cricket South Africa don't have a lot of money. I guess the other side of that coin is that they're not saving any money. They're still using DRS for all the men's tests, so there's still like an equity argument there. How do you feel about it, Raf?
Yeah, I mean, I've got mixed feelings about it. I understand the equity argument, but I also think that for years what we've been saying to cricket boards is just tack on a women's test onto the end of your tour. It won't be very expensive, and it will just cost you, the only thing it will cost you is a little bit of extra time, because you've then got to allow that kind of extra week. And Cricket South Africa have listened finally, and some of the other cricket boards like Cricket West Indies are starting to listen, and they've gone, okay, yeah, we appreciate that. And now what we're saying is, in order to play a women's test, you've also got to spend thousands and thousands of pounds on making expensive technology available. Well, I don't think that's actually a very helpful argument based on the stage that we're at, when we've only just convinced the cricket boards to actually play a test, and we're yet to convince New Zealand cricket that they should play a test at all. So if you then add on that requirement, then I think that we could end up going backwards. I'd be really surprised if we see DRS in that West Indies test that we think is going to be in Barbados next year or the year after. So I just think that let's just celebrate the fact that Cricket South Africa are having a test and not make a huge deal and be really angry about them not having spent that massive extra investment.
Yeah, and let's be clear that there is an enormous amount of money. So for those that don't know, the DRS, you don't just use the normal cameras. You have to have a load of extra special cameras installed. These cameras are owned by a couple of companies that, unsurprisingly, charge a huge amount of money for this. Ultimately, the price of DRS may end up coming down. AI is the sort of technology that could wind up, allowing much cheaper versions of DRS, but as things stand at the moment, there's only a couple of companies licensed to do it. They charge a lot of money for very, very expensive equipment. So if we're saying, as Raf says, if we're saying that South Africa have to do that, what you're saying is that women's tests are going to be really expensive. Yeah. And we know that they have kind of run this test on a budget. They've only got like 8 cameras in the ground. So if you look at when Sky film a test at Lords, for example, they'll have like over 30 cameras all around the ground. You can already see in this game quite clearly that they've got a limited number of cameras, because the views you're getting of things like boundary checks are much more limited than we're used to if we're watching a men's test. But let's, as Raf says, celebrate the fact that we are playing a test. They have done this. It's the first South Africa test in It's the first test in South Africa in the professional era, isn't it, Raf?
Yeah, the last one was 22 years ago in 2002. So I think that we should be celebrating that rather than focusing on the DRS element.
Yeah, I think Jack Rule did make an important point that from the perspective of the umpires, so Jack Rule on Blue Sky said, you know, that from the perspective of the umpires, this is unfair because it certainly hangs the umpires out to dry because it doesn't give them the fallback of DRS. And I agree that that's, you know, it does make it difficult, but, you know, we'll come back to the financial argument.
I think that we just have to...
just have to accept the situation as it is, unfortunately.
I think we do, yeah. Now... Sid, we panned England a bit last week in last week's episode after the first ODI. They did come back and win ODIs 2 and 3, so they're going into this test very much on the up. They won the T20 leg of the series and the ODI leg of the series.
Yeah, I mean, did they play brilliantly in any of the other ODIs? Well, Tammy played very well in the last ODI, where England's run chase turned into a T20 run chase. You know, the big player that England won't play in their T20 squad played a very T20 innings and played great. It was quite an interesting innings, actually, because she played a lot of strokes down the ground. There wasn't the sort of ramps and the dinky shots and the workarounds. It was very much taking it forwards. But, you know, still, England... I don't think they were massively convincing in that series, but, you know, they came away with the spoils.
It's interesting that there's been very much mixed messaging around this test as well. Heather actually spoke in her press conference yesterday about trying to kind of make meaning to this series by the England squad treating it as if it's a cohesive multi-format series and as if there are points on offer, even though there aren't. But there's also very much been an undercurrent of this is prep for the Ashes test, for the big deal that's coming up next month in Australia at the MCG, versus also still trying to say, oh, but this test is really important.
Yeah, well, you know, yeah, there were a few mixed messages in the press conference from Heather in terms of she was saying, well, we're very focused on this test and we're just looking at this test in isolation, and then going, well, we are also using it, obviously, you know, we're going to make our bowling selections based on what we think is going to happen in Melbourne.
Australia, yeah. And to some extent you feel that actually, I mean, we don't know 100% what's happening with Kate Cross, but they're being a bit conservative with playing her here, which allows Rhiannon McDonald-Gay to make a test debut. Very exciting for her. It'd be great to see how she bowls, but they may be holding back on Cross because they want her to be fit to play in Melbourne. Yeah. Could end up with a dilemma on their hands if Rhiannon has a brilliant game.
Yeah. But I mean, that's what you get from, you know, she knows she's the understudy. She knows that even if she has a good game, that Crossy will probably come back. I suppose she could displace one of the other seamers.
Absolutely, she could. Yeah, let's wait and see what happens over the next few days.
I do fear that looking at this morning's play, that it's probably going to be a batting paradise. Yeah. England are going to rack up 500, and then South Africa are going to, you know, rack up at least 400.
That certainly seems to be the way that it's going after the first session, Sid. But we've already made ourselves look stupid on last week's episode.
No, you made yourself look stupid.
Oh, thank you.
That's okay.
Okay, well, fine. You're predicting that it's going to be a bore draw. So let's see who looks stupid on next week's episode. Now, now, actually, talking of Rhiannon McDonald-Gay, there was other great news for her this week, although she would have been aware of it for several months, because the ECB have finally announced their contracts, their central contracts for the next year. And Rhiannon has been rewarded with a development contract. The contracts run from October to October. But
I'm just looking at my watch here, Raph, and it appears to be
December. Yeah, this is something the ECB again seem to have got into the habit of doing, which is for no good reason at all, delaying the announcement by 2 months, even though the players who've lost their contracts, so in this case Tash Farrant and Emma Lamb, will have been sitting on that knowledge for at least 2 months. The players who have, you know, Izzy Wong has been effectively demoted from a full contract to a development contract, will have been sitting on that. And if you're Rhiannon McDonald-Gay, or if you're Lauren Filer and Mahika Gore, who have been given or been promoted from development to full contracts, you've also had to sit on that knowledge for 2 months. So if you're interviewed in that interim period, then it's very awkward for you. I don't understand why the ECB have this weird thing about announcing the women's central contracts. The men's were announced weeks ago and they run the same period. It's just beyond me. It's baffling. But anyway. The big change this time around, Sid, other than those promotions, let's describe them, for Filer and Gore, is that the ECB have announced that some of the contracts are going to be 1 year and some of them are going to be 2-year. So we already had this kind of development strata sitting below the main contracts, but now if you get a main contract, then you sometimes get a 1-year one and you sometimes get a 2-year one. Now the people who are on 2-year ones are Bell, Dean, Eccleston, Jones, Knight, Siverbrunt and Whitehonch. So yeah, some of the people on 1-year contracts, I think, are going to feel a bit hard done by. In particular for me, if you're Sarah Glenn or Alice Capsey, you might well be sat there going, I'm not massively happy about this. What's your take on it, Sid?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that they've created these 2-year contracts. So I suspect it's kind of mirror the men's system where they are handing out a load of 2-year contracts to try and stop people from retiring. I don't think that's a risk in the women's game. I don't think Heather Knight was at risk of retiring from international cricket just to play in WPL and WBBL because she already can do that. And I just don't think it was necessary. And there is this downside that, you know, you're creating an additional very, very public stratification within the team and going, well, I've got a 2-year contract and I've only got a 1-year. And if you're Sarah Glenn or Alice Capsey, you're looking at that and you're going, well, what did I do wrong? You know, and
yeah.
It's
like
it
a kind of
tough on them.
Unnecessary hierarchy, I suppose.
Yeah.
And there's a mental health thing here, isn't there, Sid?
There is definitely. I mean, okay, so for me, I would abolish the entire contracting system because the entire contracting system is a mental health issue for the players. Because there are really only 2 categories of players. There are those who know their contracts are safe. So, you know, Heather Knight and Amy Jones and Nat Siver, you know, they're obviously going to get their contract renewed next year. But you've got an awful lot of girls in that squad that are literally spending nights and nights every year worrying about their contract. It's a constant worry. Am I going to get a contract next year? Am I going to lose it? And, you know, when you're not picked for a game, it's not, well, I know I'm not picked for a game. It's well, I've not been picked. Does this mean I'm going to lose my contract? So that mental health aspect is a huge deal and something that we could just do away with. I don't think there's a need for central contracts. England could still maintain a system where they create squads for a particular series. They, you know, gather a squad for a month ahead of a series, fine. Obviously create a squad to play a series, definitely. But do you have to kind of have this extra layer on top of it where you have, well, these people are the ones with central contracts and then we've got a group of people with lesser central contracts that will make feel bad about themselves and will kind of increase the amount of risk. Because if you're Sarah Glenn, again, you're looking at that 1-year contract going, oh God, I'm much more likely to lose my contract next year. And, you know, that's a worry for you because if you think that you're going to lose your job, even if you go, well, you know, okay, I sort of know that I can go and play for the Blaze and it'll be fine because obviously the Blaze are going to employ me from next year. Although we haven't actually had an announcement formally about how that's going to work, whereas there are some issues about that, you know, with the men's game. So I feel bad for those people and I think it's going to impact their mental health.
Okay, I don't know whether doing away with the central contracts, we've talked about this before, would actually have that impact that you think it will have though. I think it would just create a different hierarchy of people who are always in an England squad versus people who are sometimes in an England squad, personally. But yeah, I mean, I do think that this 2-year, 1-year thing is interesting. One thing that did happen a few years ago, and I actually spent ages looking this up this morning because I had a distinct memory that a few years ago the ECB did introduce 2-year contracts for the women. It was in 2017. And Claire Connor said that it was another significant step forward in the professionalisation of the women's game in this country. So they had 2-year contracts and then they just disappeared after a couple of years. They just decided to abolish that. And they never really explained why.
They never made a big announcement
No, they didn't, funnily enough. But that was for everybody. So you either had what was then a rookie contract, what's now called a development contract, or you had a 2-year contract. That's totally different. This is basically saying, well, some people are going to have more job security than others. And I'm afraid all it's going to do is reinforce what we believe and have heard are kind of existing rifts and cliques within that squad. It doesn't really do anything to necessarily fix that. And it creates new issues. Another quick question, Sid. Are you surprised not to see Lindsay Smith on the contract list?
Well, no, not really, because Lindsay, you know, is a consummate professional. She works hard, she trains hard, you know, she keeps herself in peak fitness. She's a player that's improved a lot over the last few years. England know that if they call on her, she'll be there and she'll be ready. So I don't think that it's oddly the case of Lindsay Smith shows in some ways where you don't need central contracts, because you know, she will be ready whenever they call her. If they do call her up, she'll be ready. And if they don't call her up, then she'll carry on, doing what she does for her county team.
Okay.
So, yeah.
It just seems a bit odd that she played in the World Cup and played a significant role, and somebody like Mahika Gore hasn't played. I think she's maybe played one match for England over the last year. She played one in Ireland,
yeah.
But other than that, hasn't played at all, and is being bumped up to a senior contract.
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by Mahika, to be honest. I mean, nothing personally against it, but I thought that they would let her go back to Lancs. But obviously, John Lewis has stuck a stake in the ground and, sung loud and clear, "I can fix her." No, really, I can.
That was a Taylor Swift quote for anyone who's not familiar.
Can he fix her? Well, we'll see. I mean, good luck to him. I hope that he does. But there's obviously still work to do there, because she's not the fast bowler they called up when they were worried that they might need an extra player. They've sent Grace Potts on the plane to South Africa just in case.
Just in case. What a lot of money to fly somebody to South Africa for a week. Nothing against Grace Potts at all. It's really exciting for her. But to fly somebody in to be a net bowler, to fly them business class to South Africa.
Yeah, and then when what does that say about Mahika as well? It obviously says that we don't think that Mahika was remotely ready to play in this test, even as a net bowler or a reserve.
Yeah.
So, what's actually happening with her then?
One final point on this, actually, on the 2-year thing. Obviously, one of the people with a 2-year contract, Heather Knight. That is basically saying to us that you're going to see Heather Knight be captain for the next 2 years. Yeah,
and interestingly enough, there seems to be some talk coming out now saying that these players are looking at the Olympics as what they want to get to. So previously, it's always been we want to get to the home T20 World Cup in 2026. That's where we want to get to. The hint that they'll retire after. We're now hearing talk that they want to carry on to the Olympics in 2028. So that's where Heather Knight thinks she's going.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue, just because she's got a 2-year contract doesn't mean that she'll stay as captain for that time. If you think that Heather Knight is going to stay in this team and not be the captain,
you don't know Heather Knight very well.
You don't know her very well. Yeah, that's what I'm going
to
say.
There's nothing to stop England just paying her off and just going, well, yeah, here's your 2-year contract.
Yeah, but okay.
But, yeah. Anyway.
That would be an expensive contract break, I suspect. Anyway, Sid, talking of money and salaries, there's also been an announcement this week in relation to the 100. Salary rises in the 100 next season. Players in the top bracket in the 100 men's competition will earn $200,000. In the women's competition, players in the top bracket will earn $65,000. Now, Heather Knight was actually asked about this in the press conference right at the end yesterday, and was clearly a little bit grumpy about being asked about this, which I think is silly because inevitably she should have been asked about it, and basically kind of said, oh, it's not ideal, it doesn't look great, but I want to kind of emphasise that overall the women's pay has risen, which is true.
Yeah,
it's factually correct, Sid, but it doesn't. If we focus on that aspect, then we're overlooking something quite important, aren't we?
Yeah, I mean, so look, if you look at everybody's pay altogether, everybody's pay, there's a total uplift of 2.3 million. So if you add up all the pay rises for everybody, it gets 2.3 million.
Okay.
Over half of that 2.3 million has gone to the Band 1 men. £1.2 million to be shared among 16 men that have got pay rises of £75,000 each. And that pay rise is more than Heather Knight's going to earn for the competition. So it's really all about those top men, increasing their salaries. And it wasn't even just about the women here. It was about all the other men, because all the other men also didn't get huge pay rises. In fact, some of the men barely got any. In fact, possibly some of the men got very minimal pay rises. Right. They all got a small pay rise, but some of them were really minimal.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, I was looking at the Professional Cricketers Association and going, guys, if you're not even focused on the men, what are you doing? Because you should. At the very least, even if the Professional Cricketers Association is sitting there going, well, we don't really care about the women, you should be caring about the men, even if you're a confirmed misogynist, care about what the men are earning.
But it turns out they do care,
But it turns out they do care, because actually the ECB have managed to actually upset the Professional Cricketers Association, and who are unhappy that so much of this money is going to a very small number of men, while everybody else has to share a much smaller package. So, yeah, I mean...
And the PCA did, in their press release or their statement about this, did mention the women. They did say that it's a shame that the pay gap is widening instead of narrowing. That's essentially the key takeaway from this, right? Is you can look at it and go, in absolute terms, the women's pay has increased, but if the men's pay has increased even more, this is a gender regressive move rather than a gender progressive move.
Heather Knight's pay has increased by £15,000. Alex Hales or whoever's pay has increased by £75,000.
And so the PCA have kind of critiqued this, but they have largely critiqued it from the perspective of the vast majority of their membership, who are the kind of this middle chunk of men who are professional but aren't like, you know, and
aren't getting a share of this windfall either.
Money. Yeah.
So how do we feel about this, you know, and how do we feel about this in relation to the ISEC report?
Well,
because
I mean, I've obviously angry. I guess it's kind of like one of those ones where you're like angry but not surprised. If you look at the way in which the ECB responded to the ISEC's recommendations about pay, they very much kicked the can down the road. And they basically said, you know, they tried to say, oh yes, we like the ISEC and we think, you know, your recommendations are great, but we just can't do all of those right now because it's going to be very expensive.
But there was an implication that they would do them eventually,
Absolutely.
Right? And they'd be working towards pay equality.
It was pointed out to me on Blue Sky that in February this year, Claire Connor told a government select committee in the House of Commons that the direction of travel was to aim for equal pay. She said, we are committed to getting there. Equal pay in the 100 specifically. But Richard Gold, in the last few days, has done an interview with the BBC where he said the opposite. He said, we want to see more of the top 50 men's players in the world playing in the 100. And the gap between the men and the women has got bigger because of market dynamics. It wasn't a recommendation from the ISEC that we said we could deliver on. We've been very upfront on that. Well, no, you haven't actually. You actually weren't upfront, because upfront you said you were aiming at doing this, and now you've just completely changed your tune. So it's a classic example of one of those things that people say in interviews as like a rhetorical device of, we've been very upfront on that. And when you actually look at what they've done, you realise that no, they haven't been very upfront on that. So what he's saying is, we're back to the market. We're back to where we always were, the ECB and all other cricket boards in the world, to be fair, justifying vastly unequal pay on the basis of market forces. So they've abandoned the ISEC, essentially. That's my takeaway from it. And that is not anything that I think anybody from the ECB can object to me saying, because this is literally what Richard Gold said to the BBC.
Yep.
Between February 2024 and December 2024, somewhere along the road, a decision was taken that was more important to get the top men playing in the 100 than it was to have progress towards pay equity between the men and the women. And the ironic thing is, I don't even think they're going to be successful at getting the top men to come here and play in the 100.
No, because the trouble is that whatever they pay the top men, the Major League Cricket, we should bear in mind that Major League Cricket is driven by the bottomless pockets of the IPL billionaires. The Major League Cricket are going, well, we'll pay more then.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
So it just means that whenever they want, the top men can throw their toys out of the pram and say you're not paying us enough. And all of that money, this is what's going on here, isn't it, Sid? All of that new money that's coming into English cricket is always going to land in the pockets of the top men. Yeah,
well, it's always what happens. As we've said it so many times, and here is your proof. More money comes into the sport, where it ends up, whatever sport it is, whatever money it is, it ends up in the pockets of the top male players.
Anyway, shall we go back to the test match where Cricket South Africa probably gonna
need to take some wickets this afternoon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for tuning in, everyone, and we will see you in a week's time. Bye-bye.
Bye.